Hi, everyone. Welcome to Pinot and Policy, where we have conversations about government policy, go figure, politics, and some wine and levity mixed in. I'm your host, Rafe D'Amico, here with my co-host, Eric Settle, former candidate for Attorney General, where we hope to bring some interesting perspectives on some topics as a Boomer and Gen Xer. Eric's the Boomer, just for the record. Um, Eric, what are we going to be getting into today?
Well, Rafe, it's great to be with you. This is episode number 13 of Pinot and Policy.
And how fitting that 13 comes out on the week of Halloween.
It does. It is. Although, as you know, as a Colgate graduate, 13 is our lucky number because the university was started by 13 men who gave $13 and 13 prayers to start Colgate University in 1819.
Oh,
and I could actually, there's actually a tune behind those lyrics, but I won't bore the audience with that. But
we'll save the singing for the end of the episode. How about
the
that?
levity. Anyway, so it's great to be back. We've been away for a little bit. We're as Rafe and I like to say, this is what we do for fun, not what we do for a living. Just as we always say at the beginning, the views that are expressed during Pinot and Policy are those of mine and my co-host Rafe D'Amico, and not of my law firm Royer Cooper, Cohn and Braunfeld, or Rafe's organization Ad Fontes. So what we're going to talk about today. Well, look, you can't ever have a podcast and not start with talking about the president. It's been an interesting 6 weeks since we've last been together, and all sorts of stuff has been going on. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's going on in Washington and sort of what I like to say, what matters and what doesn't matter. Because I think so much is going on that you have to start to kind of draw lines about, what does matter. We'll talk a little bit about Pennsylvania. We still don't have a budget in Pennsylvania, as the United States government is also closed down. We'll talk a little bit about our governor and things he needs to do to kind of move forward. I know, as you know, I'm a big fan, but at some point you have to find a way to get a budget. Then we'll talk a little bit about local politics. There's a PA Supreme Court race. People have probably seen the ads for those who are in Pennsylvania. And then a little bit about forward party activity. We're endorsing a couple of key candidates. So we'll be talking about that. And then if we have time, we'll talk about wine. Since we last spent, I had a chance to sail the Rhine River and have a chance to sample some wines from that region. And my conclusion is it's good, but get me back to France.
All right. I'm excited for the wine part. Let's start with
The president.
president. Yeah.
Right. So as you know, when we started this podcast, it was after the election, but before the inauguration. And I think what I said to everybody is we should focus on what he does and not what he says, because so much of what he says is distracting. And I think as we move forward, we realize that he's doing a lot of things. Some things are good, some things are less good, depending on your point of view. So I think what I realize is that we really have to focus on what he's doing, and of that, what matters and what doesn't matter.
So what do you think matters the most of all the things that he's doing, between the tariffs, between the, I don't know, reconstruction of the wing of the, is it the west? That's not the West Wing. Which wing
It's
is
the
it?
East Wing.
It's the East Wing, right?
Right. Here's what I think. I think his flirting with the idea of a third term really matters, because that is what sort of makes us, that is so not constitutional I think that matters. I think blowing up boats in international waters matters. I think that's something that matters. I think occupying cities, may matter. I mean, I think, when we last spoke, he had, would send troops to D.C. Yesterday in Japan, he told a group of sailors that he was planning on sending troops to other states. I just think that's something that is not part of what American presidents do in peacetime. And so I worry. I mean, I think that's something that I worry about. I do worry about his indicting of political enemies. I think, since we last spoke, he indicted, James Comey was indicted, Letitia James was indicted, John Bolton was indicted. I think the John Bolton case is different. I think John Bolton actually, did have, confidential records, and as we know from the president's own experience at when he left office, and frankly President Biden's experience when he left office, the classified documents issue is tricky. Whether or not it rose to a level of criminality, we'll see. But very different than the Letitia James case or the James Comey case, which are really based on almost nothing. And
that's a lot. Those are a lot of things to unpack, right? So if we just look at them individually, and why don't we start with
third term?
Well, I mean, and there's probably three that are like the most controversial and in the headlines and topical, and like I would argue that's the third term, and like ICE and National Guard in a lot of our major cities, and then blowing up boats in international waters. I mean, even if we just started with the blowing up of boats, of vessels in international waters, what do you say to the person that says, like, if you look at the most extreme argument with that, somebody says, "Oh well, like if a missile was headed towards the United States, would the president or the military need congressional approval to eliminate that threat?" Right? There's a threat of a missile that's on its way to the U.S., and there are minutes, if not seconds, to make a decision on eliminating this threat, and somebody has to act. What's the argument between differentiating that and being like, judge, jury, executioner?
Right. Right. Right.
Who knows where it's heading?
Right. The difference is that, sort of this idea of an imminent threat to the United States. Okay. I mean, the president has the power to protect the United States. And there was a movie called The House of Dynamite that just came out on Netflix that's all about a missile coming to the United States.
Oh, and
it's fascinating. In other words, it's basically the same 20 minutes from the time the missile leaves from some unknown location heading to Chicago, and we see the story in three different buckets from three different points of views. But the point is that the president has a right and a duty to protect the United States, and so that's okay. So what you have to do, so use the example that he's arguing that these boats are missiles filled with fentanyl coming to our borders. It's like, okay, maybe that's reasonable. Okay, but who can you now explain to the American people who these are, what's on that boat, why you made that selection? In other words, what's happening is, it's like if you do it once and you say there's an imminent threat to the United States, that's you can make it an argument that that's appropriate. But we've now blown up 14 boats, and 59 people have been killed. And other than the assertion that these are narco-terrorists, the administration has not given any other justification for what they're doing. And the problem is,
what's scary is, like, assuming they are narco-terrorists, and like they don't actually exactly have a history of like high morals and ethics. So at what point do these narco-terrorists just decide that they're going to kidnap some young children, put them on the boat with them, and use them as essentially
human shields,
right?
Right. And the answer is, I don't know if our whether the intelligence is sufficient to know. I mean, look, the truth is, the way we dealt with this as a country is we used the Coast Guard to do what their function is, which is to defend the coastline. And we interdicted boats. We seized boats. We fired upon boats. But we didn't sort of create this video game and use the Navy. I guess they're using the Navy. We don't know. Again, we don't know how these ships. All we know is we're getting a little clip of ship and then people being blown to bits.
Yeah.
And the problem is that again, one of the issues that's going on with some of the things that's going on is, look, we can make the argument that blowing up narco-terrorists is actually a good idea, okay? But that's this president's view. What if President AOC, at some future time, says that I want to blow up conservatives? I mean, I'm trying to give an example. It's so crazy to come up with an example, but like someone she wants to kill because she feels that's a threat to the United States. And again, this idea of at some point, if you go outside the law, because the truth is that force outside the United States is supposed to be authorized by the Congress. And in fact, there's an authorization. All the stuff we've done in the Middle East all came from a resolution from the Congress authorizing probably George W. Bush to declaring Al Qaeda and all those countries to be terrorists and a threat to the United States, and we were in a war with them. And at least there's some basis. Again, at some point, the president may bring that forward to the Congress, but in the meantime, the Congress is not objecting, although some congressmen, including Rand Paul, are starting to object. And it just continues, and it's a problem. It's a problem. It's not how the United States, it's not legal under United States law. It's certainly not legal under international law. I mean, it's interesting because, this president, frankly, is probably immune from prosecution, even if this is criminal. This is if you remember, after the Trump administration was over, the Supreme Court ruled that presidents are criminally immune from official acts. And the truth of the matter is that you can make a very strong argument that these are certainly acts taken in his role as president of the United States. Now, it may be an unlawful act, okay, but in other words, he's not blowing up, boats that are bringing supplies to a competitor for Trump stakes. In other words, he's acting as president.
Let me ask you this then. Let's look at it from, an end justifying the means perspective. Let's hypothetically say in a year's time, drug trafficking to the U.S. is cut in half, drug use is down, drug arrests are down. There's a million arguments why that probably wouldn't happen, right? Who knows if people want drugs, they get drugs. Who knows what drugs are on these boats?
Right.
Let's pretend it's fentanyl. Well, then, is that just going to increase the cocaine usage, right? Is every coca farmer in Colombia now going to make a windfall of money coming in, especially since now we're no longer sending aid to Cuba or Colombia anymore. Another reason why those farmers maybe have an incentive to plant more coca leaves. So yeah, it's probably just going to divert the drug usage. But let's just pretend in a year that it has amazing results. Does that justify the action from your POV?
The answer is it can't. In other words, look, that would be a great result, okay? But the ends can't justify the means. There is I'm not saying don't stop boats. I'm not saying don't stop them. I'm saying is the way you do, and again, it sounds silly, but the way you do it matters. In other words,
due process matters, right?
Right. The point is, we don't even know who these people. Right. We are, as you said it, we are judge, jury, and executioner all in one fell swoop, and there's been zero so far any accountability for who these people are, what they were doing, and why we're doing it. That's the whole point. In other words, the missile example you gave is there's a missile coming from somewhere. Interesting part about the plot of this movie is they don't know where it's coming from.
Ooh.
And so the decision for the president of the United States is, who do I shoot at? I want to retaliate. Chicago is about to blow up. So I need to launch a retaliatory strike, but where do I launch it?
Revenge.
But the question is, on whom?
Right.
And so one of the ideas, and I'm not giving away any of the plot, is everybody, like everybody who's got a nuclear weapon gets blown up. Because since we don't know who it is, we will blow up everybody.
It's a ridiculous premise, but
Well, if you don't know, but
yeah.
so I think
Everybody dies.
I think the ends. So I think that's an issue. But again, this is one of those issues where I will say the president is brilliant politically, because most people would say, so what's wrong with blowing up narco terrorists? Like that's like I just want to feed my family and go to work. Like these people are bad. Fentanyl is bad. And I can't not say that that's true, but it's like there are these certain things that are not. So I always think about myself is like, what is it? What issue is what I call the break the glass issue? The metaphor is that fire alarm that has that case of emergency, break the glass, you break it, either you take the axe out or you hit the button, whatever it is. What is it? And I don't know. I've been thinking that for me, the break the glass moment is him flirting with this third term.
So it's not the Chris Rock metaphor of breaking the glass. What he used to say about a platonic friend.
No, I did not know that one.
It's a conversation for another time.
Yes. So I mean, I think that's one where I think that matters. I think, by the way, this government shutdown. It'd be interesting to see, it's been going on now for, almost 30 days. There's really no end in sight. Obviously, this week, the SNAP program that provides food assistance to 40 million Americans runs out of money. There's an interesting question because, there's this thing called the filibuster in the Senate, which requires 60 votes, which means that unless you have a supermajority, 60 votes, you need both Democrats and Republicans. And there are three Democrats who've been voting with the Republicans. John Fetterman, the senator from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, has been one of them. But the question is does the president say, let's just get rid of the filibuster, make it just a simple majority and then move on?
Well, I know there'd be at least one senator from West Virginia that would object to that particular method.
Well, and that senator from West Virginia, is now, he's now a retired senator.
Yeah,
and
he made a living off of it. Well,
no, he did. I think that's, I mean, frankly, for a party like Forward that you and I have been affiliated with, that idea of having, a couple of centrist per people is sort of the dream of having some control to bring the parties from the two extremes.
So let's talk about that. That idea of why a filibuster is important to have and matters, as painful as it is, and as much as when it's your side trying to get something passed, and it's frustrating because if you have a split Senate, you're just thinking, well, we've got a majority. Why do we need the 10 votes? It shouldn't matter. Why does it matter, right? It's like you've got the House can pass a bill with a simple majority, but the Senate needs those extra votes.
I mean, I think it's an idea that having some bipartisanship is an important aspect of our country. That we need that we are healthier, we are more successful when we govern from the middle than when we govern from the extremes. And but practically speaking, right now it's a Republican-controlled Senate, but 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 6 years from now, it might be a democratically controlled Senate. And so I think the issue is that giving the minority party some influence over some issues. In other words, some of the issues aren't there anymore. Supreme Court justices are now, simple majority. Lower court judges are simple majority. I mean, they've edged. They used to refer to it as, apropos to our conversation, the nuclear option. Like, in other words, you're pretty much blowing up the Senate. And what I'm saying is that, well, I think that would be a terrible idea, and I think that's why it's still in place, because those who are in power now recognize that they won't always be in power. The fact of the matter is that so much that has gone on over the last 8 to 10 years in American politics is things you said, well, they would never do that, they do.
Yeah, it's interesting because we there seems to be a trend of relinquishing checks and balances and giving more and more power to the center, to less and less people, and like getting rid of the filibuster would do that. It would make it that much easier for one person or one party or a small group of people within a party to very quickly change laws and get things done without the checks and balances that have existed since the formation of this country to help provide safety nets and to make sure you get bipartisan endorsement, right? And to slow things down, right?
Well,
As
right,
much as
right. That's
and,
exactly
and
right. And that, I mean,
but
these
but
again, these,
but
yeah.
but Eric, that's juxtaposed. So we've seen the benefit of moving slowly and getting building consensus over the short almost 250 years of our country. But we live in a time where people are so impatient and want things instantaneously and don't want to put in the work to get things done, right? So like I wonder, and I'm curious if that mentality will survive as we have younger and younger, like, Congress people coming in that are going to impact these rules and laws and
Well,
regulations.
it's interesting because I think that you hope that, yeah, I don't know. I mean, one of the problems we're going to have in the country as they start to redraw the lines again, and of course, there's what's going on in California, what's going on in Texas, a bunch of different states. We're going to have even less and less swing districts. So they're going to be even more and more Congress people who are hewing to their base's philosophy. So the answer is I think in a world like that, that's why I say, you look at it and you go, why have that antiquated idea? If I have the majority, majority rules. Why does that hang around? And that's, part of what the American experiment is worth is that it works.
Tyranny of the majority. You can have the tyranny of one or tyranny of the majority, and we are moving very quickly towards an extreme of both.
Right. And look, I something that I think that doesn't matter of the things that matter, as much as, we shouldn't tear down the East Wing without a little bit of notice and a little bit of process. The fact of the matter is that, and it is a metaphor. I mean, it is such a visual metaphor for the way this administration has approached so many issues. At the end of the day, the Trump ballroom will probably be very pretty. Future presidents will benefit from it. But again, it's a little bit of a process. Again, this idea of process, whether you're blowing up boats or you're tearing down parts of the White House, does the ends justify the means?
Well, we could probably talk about that for the rest of the episode, but I know there's a number of other things we want to get to. So why don't we kind of use that as the last word for now before we get into something a little bit more local, which is the Pennsylvania budget.
Right. So the Pennsylvania budget, as you know, the budget is supposed to get passed in July. July 1st is when the fiscal year ends. It's now, when we're taping this, it's October 29th. There's some kind of no end in sight. And I really think you're starting to see, like with the federal government shutdown, you're starting to see, impacts. Agencies are not being able to get the funding that have been allocated or would be allocated to them in the budget. And I do think it falls to the governor to, figure out a way to get this deal done. I mean, I know a lot of the parties involved. There's a lot of intransigence. There's a lot of hurt feelings on both sides from, previous previous budget battles. But I think for Governor Shapiro, who really is someone who I think has a great future both here in Pennsylvania and beyond, I think it's starting to not reflect well on him. and I think that he's got to figure out a way to work and come up with a compromise, whether it's on SEPTA funding or educational funding. I mean, these issues are solvable. It's just a matter of compromise. But otherwise, I think he just run the risk of hurting. He's running for re-election in 26, but he has that slogan of getting stuff done. And obviously, the thing he did with I-95 was an amazing bout of leadership to help the region. But it's not quite. Yeah.
There was a really nice feather in his cap, but he's, since then, and then, sadly, since that horrific attack on his life with the firebomb, he hasn't really been in the news much, outside of maybe getting ready to go on a book tour. Like, if you were Governor Shapiro's strategist, what kind of advice would you be giving him right now? Because I know, like, a lot of fans of his, obviously people in Pennsylvania love him. There are a lot of people around the country who look to him as maybe a potential presidential candidate. What advice would you be giving him right now as a strategist?
Yeah, I would tell him kind of what I just said, which is, look, got to figure out a way. First thing is you got to figure out a way to get the budget done, because the fact of the matter is that all 49 other states have their budgets in, so we're an outlier. So now recognize we have a split. We have a Republican Senate and a Democratic House, but step one is get the budget resolved. And then step two is, continue to look for some achievement that, he can point to say, we're getting stuff done. I mean, look, they're getting a lot of stuff done. The truth is, a lot of this stuff, they are getting a lot of stuff done. In other words, they have reformed the permit process. They've reformed the business licensing process. I mean, if you talk to business people, it's a lot easier to do work with the Commonwealth. So I think they are, but I think he's got to figure out what's what's next. And look, I also think he is defending the Commonwealth against some stuff in Washington. There were a couple of lawsuits filed this week, one related to the SNAP program and one related to security funding. Apparently, the president has cut security funding for Pennsylvania, or actually he says he's cutting it for Philadelphia because they're being a sanctuary city. So that's what I would tell him. And I would tell him, look, by the way, some of this stuff that he's talked about coming out of that attack in April, I'm very proud of what he said. As a Jewish American, luckily the war in Gaza seems hopefully to be coming to an end, and I'll give the president an enormous amount of credit for bringing the living hostages home and for getting a process started. As we can see, it's harder. It's easier to sign agreements than actually implement those agreements. But I think I think for the governor, he's expressed something, and he said something the other day in an article in the New York Times where he talked to his kids about whether or not they should still keep doing this. No, so what he was saying about his kids is, should we do this? And he said something that I've said in connection with my service as a synagogue president, as we've sort of ramped up, security, which is you can't let the bad guys win. If a talented public servant like Josh Shapiro steps off the stage because he's afraid of the threats that may come his way, then we've let those people win. And you can't let those people win. And I think it was so interesting to hear him say something that I've said publicly in connection with that service, which is, we gotta be brave. And so I was happy to see that. And, he's got a book coming out in January that probably will talk a lot about that. And frankly, when you're looking for a president, you're looking for vision. You're looking for someone who has a message that resonates broadly. And I've said that, frankly, his religion, him sort of wearing his Judaism on his sleeve, I think, and you're from a different religious faith, I think it gets his respect from anyone who's religious, regardless of whether they're Jewish or Catholic or Muslim or whatever. Like if you're a believer in whatever division you believe in, that says something to people. When you're a person of faith, you're
not a fair weather fan.
You're
right?
not a fair weather fan. And I think that appeal to people who are people of faith, regardless of how they express that, I think that is something that, in my view, overcomes the anti-Semitism that says, yeah, but he's Jewish. So I'm hopeful that that will be the case. And as I said, he's got to get the budget done. And because it's just starting to drag on and it's making him look bad. And frankly, it's giving his opponents something to say, something to complain about.
Well, maybe that's a good place for us to leave it. I know we wanted to get to the Supreme Court race and a little bit of update on the Ford party. Why don't we skip the Supreme Court race for this episode?
Sure.
And
let's just talk about the Ford party.
Yeah, because I know you had a recent event there, so it's timely.
Yeah, no. So the Forward Party has endorsed Pat Dugan, who's running against Larry Krasner. As listeners of this podcast know, we talk about Larry Krasner at least once a podcast, and he's a stand-up guy, a former judge, former soldier. I learned a little more. Get to spend a little time with him last week. Get to know him. I mean, what was impressive is he served in the Army, and then after 9/11 re-enlisted like at age 40, which again, I think that shows an incredible dedication to his country and to criminal justice reform. And he and I had a conversation that reminded me a lot of the things we talked about when I was running for AG, which is this idea of, look, restorative justice matters. People of color have been mistreated for decades, centuries by the criminal justice system. And we've got to fix things like that. But the DA really has to be a prosecutor. And he's making his best. And again, having the Forward Party endorsement, and Andrew Yang was in town and did a video for him, and I had a chance to spend some time with Andrew.
Nice.
Andrew is, he is the ever ready bunny, and it's fun to be with him, and it was fun to have him involved. And the other place where the Forward Party was involved is there's a sheriff's race up in Bucks County, a guy named Danny Seisler, again, another former soldier who, went and served his country and then came back and served in the Shapiro administration for the state emergency management agency, running against Bucks County sheriff against an incumbent. But, again, these people, the Forward Party tries to endorse people who are trying to solve solutions and not trying to be partisan about it. And I think both those guys are worthy of your votes. And if you happen to be voting either in Bucks County or Philadelphia between now and next Tuesday, I will not be on the ballot. So use that vote to vote for either Danny or you can't do both because you live in Bucks County. You can't vote for the DA. But wherever you are, those are good people.
Well, there you hear Eric's endorsement. I'm still trying to find Harvey Dent. Is he on any of the ballots?
You got a which face?
Harvey's. Yeah.
So, all right. So let's talk. Let's take 2 minutes on. We got to do more on wine, but let me just talk a little bit about. I had a chance to do a cruise along the Rhine River. Beautiful vineyards. Had a chance to see.
We're assuming a lot here. Where for
is the Rhine River?
Listeners, where's the Rhine River?
The Rhine River is in central Germany.
Mm-hmm.
It pretty much runs from Basel, Switzerland, to Amsterdam, the Netherlands, and it cuts through some beautiful areas in Germany. There's actually an area called the Rhine Gorge, which is a 10 or 15 mile sort of area where it becomes a gorge, more of a gorge than just a river in flatlands. And along that gorge are literally, tens of some destroyed, some restored castles. It's if you ever see a river cruise commercial on television, there's two things you're now going to see. You're going to see the Parliament House in Budapest, and you're going to see all these cool castles along the Rhine Gorge, and
Are those other castles that get like advertised on to me on Instagram? Like I could own a castle for 80,000 euros kind of.
some of them might be, some of them might be, but
But it would cost me 10 million to renovate it, right?
yeah. So anyway, so that's where the Rhine is, and that's one of the regions. It's a famous region in Germany where Rieslings come from. Riesling has historically been sort of known as kind of a sweeter wine, but the fact of the matter is they've been making dry Rieslings, for 1,000 years. What's interesting about the Rhine is it was essentially the border of the Roman Empire. So when the Romans sort of kind of moved up through Europe, the Rhine was the dividing line between sort of the part of Europe, which was kind of France up into England, and the Rhine was where the barbarians were on the other side.
All the Germanic tribes and Gaul and
Yes.
it was, but eventually that got expanded. But I'm with you. I'm a fan of Rieslings. I've enjoyed them for quite some time, especially when you get those bone dry Rieslings that can get that like flinty kind of smell and taste to them. Like it almost smells a little bit like graphite or like you're smelling a pencil. Or even like the way that a match would smell. And I know some of those smells and flavors might not sound like appealing to some people, but I promise you, when it's on the wine, it's in a subtle way.
Yeah.
Punch you in the face, and it gives a really unique taste and flavor profile. And you really only get that with a Riesling in those German areas, right? Yeah, you get some nice Austrian Rieslings, and then of course the Alsatian ones, which is that border area between France and Germany that has traded hands numerous times over the years.
In fact, it's fascinating. I had a chance to meet someone, one of the tour guides there, who, his grandfather lived in four different, essentially was born in Germany, lived in France, got, once again in Germany when the Germans took over that region, and then finally Strasbourg is France again. And fascinating place. And also just a reminder sometimes of the benefit that we at the United States have of having, oceans on either side and not really having anyone ever kind of, other than kind of at the very beginning of our nation, come to our nation and run over countries. But, in Europe, they've been, for 2,000 years, they've been trading hands. And so it's interesting. The fact that Europe is as peaceful as it's been for the last 80 years is a testament to NATO and the support of the United States, which is, to go back, why that's important is, that's an important part of the world, and they've been peaceful. I see you've found a Riesling. Oh, what have you there?
It's a Mosel Riesling, and for people who are watching, in addition to listening, you can see it's a very unique bottle, right? Like you can always identify Rieslings, not always, almost always identify Rieslings by their like thin, elongated bottle. So when you see this type of bottle, chances are it's a Riesling. This one, like Rieslings from the Mosel region, I really love. And what's nice about Rieslings, it's lower alcohol content most of the time. This one is a 7.5%, which is about half the alcohol of a usual bottle. So, you can drink more of it, or you could drink the same amount and have a little bit less of the effect. So go out there, enjoy Rieslings. Eric, I heard you mentioning the benefit of having, an ocean on either side of our borders, and really only one time that the U.S. was invaded, and when that happened, the White House was set ablaze. And I think up until this recent demolition by Trump, it was the last time that the White House was damaged. So just to bring us full circle with all of our topics, to everybody watching or listening, thanks for tuning in. Please like, comment, and follow the show. Share it with your friends and family so we can get the word out, and appreciate everything.
Thank you. Thanks, Rafe. See everybody. See you very soon.